Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Crashes and Taxes. I am your host for this podcast, Rebecca Walser, and I'm so glad to be back with you this January of 2023. I have been away for a while, end of the year, a lot of stuff to do with the business, a lot of closeouts, and then really, frankly, just a lot of stuff going on already for 2023. This year, I'm going to focus more on the podcast and growing the audience. So if you want me to keep doing this on a weekly basis, I need your help and getting the audience to grow. So please tell your friends, family, give us 5 stars. The more people that are demanding me to take the time to do the show, which I do because I love my country. I love finance. I love economics. I love math. I love math. I love math. And that is what finance and economics is. It's the business version of math. And so I just need to allocate. This is not something that I monetize. And I would love to get this podcast to grow so that I can definitely spend more and more time on it. So if you enjoy my podcast, tell your friends, let's get it to grow organically. And then we can spend more time on it. And I won't feel like I'm having to sneak away from my real life to, get this information out to the world in an understandable format. So let's get started because there's so much to go over in just the first 2.5 weeks of this year so far. So let's get going. All right. The first thing I want to point out is the consumer price information for December. You guys all know that it came in at 6.5%, which a lot of people are misunderstanding. They're like saying, oh, look, inflation's trending down. No, not really. No, that's not what's happening. Inflation is always what we call year over year, YOY, a year over year number. So when you get a December read of prices, what that means is the prices in December of 2022 are 6.5% higher than the prices were in December of 2021. It's a year over year calculation. It's measured monthly, so we can see the trend of how it's changing. Now, we did peak, obviously getting into that 9 range, and then 8, 7, then we're kind of trickling down. But those numbers are the numbers that were in 2022 over 2021. So what I'm saying is that when you came out with, a 6 range inflation in 2021 that the Federal Reserve was able just to pass off as transitory and people bought that hook, line, and sinker, then we came into 2022 and we had already a higher base of prices from 2020 and 2021 of at least 5+%. And then from 2021 to 2022, we went up another, anywhere from 8 to 10%. And now we're measuring 2022 to 2021. And again, it's still up 6.5%. So just understand that these are cumulative readings, that they're on top of the yearly increase of prices the previous year, which we already had inflation in 2021. So while the growth rate of expanding of inflation is slowing, we're not inflating as fast as we were. That's slowing. We still do have inflation. And again, I will mention to you, if we were to use the same calculation that they were using in the 80s with, when we had the S&L crises, if they were using the same numbers that we're using in the 70s with the oil embargo, 70s and 80s, if we were using the same calculations, we would be in the double digits. We would be quite substantially in the double digits. So I would say at least anywhere from 14 to 18% is our true inflation. And I don't have to tell you, look at the price of eggs. The egg crisis, it's interesting. I do so much research, you guys know that, but I was literally reading about, high-end neighborhoods and with HOAs, homeowners associations, and arguing about whether or not the HOA would allow these nice neighborhoods to have chickens. And it's because people want fresh. They don't want all this processed crap. And then they want something that isn't going to cost them $20 to buy a dozen eggs. So inflation is still here. It is dissipating. However, what the administration did was they released a lot of the oil reserves. We all know this, to get the price of gas to come down, which it did have a substantial impact. However, now we're at the lowest strategic reserves we've had in, I think, over 60 years. really since it's been tracked. And the thing is that the administration has just said as of last week that they haven't ruled out potentially using even more reserves. So that is a whole thing. So let's get me back on here and let's go into this. I want to quickly go over the asset classes for 2022 that were the best performers. You can see here, obviously, the first off the top, natural gas. And this is purely a play of what happened with Russia, Ukraine, and NATO and the West versus Russia, basically. And obviously, the pipelines that got the Nord Stream pipelines 1 and 2 that were dismantled, blown up, that obviously had an impact. Then you can see oil right behind it, 9.8%. And then you can see the dollar index. So that basically means the dollar. And we talked about that multiple times, how Powell was between a rock and a hard place and had no option. If he didn't want the dollar to collapse, he had no option but to strengthen it. And he used the interest rates. We had 7 interest rate hikes last year. 8 interest rate hikes last year. And we are in the 4.25 to 4.5 range of the federal funds rate with our next Federal Open Market Committee meeting on January 31st and February 1st. And pretty much consensus now, CME Group consensus is that we're going to get a 25 basis point raise. So you can see that the dollar, crude, and natural gas were our top 3 performers. And then other than that, global infrastructure, which is in the category, everything else really went down. Global infrastructure lost 0.2%. Gold came down 0.2%, and cash came down 0.5% or a 0.5%. So you can see that not even 1% loss on cash, gold, and infrastructure, and then everything else quite negative. So you have industrial metals, high yield bonds, which are, of course, our junk bonds. Those were down 11%. The actual interesting thing was if you look at all of the asset categories, look at these Apple down 26.8%, Microsoft down 28.7%, real estate down 30.7% last year. Google, which is Alphabet, down 39.1%. Amazon down almost 50%, 49.6% for Amazon. Meta, 64.2%. Tesla, 65%. That is, of course, all of the Twitter situation there. And Bitcoin, of course, 65%. So this is just to tell you that what we said last year, which was that the thing to do would be to be in metals and cash and to avoid the asset classes unless you knew that the pipelines were going to get blown up. You wouldn't know that natural gas would jump that much. And so you have to know like things like that will happen before. Who's going to know that? No one. So we were really accurate with our client base. Hopefully you guys either know what you're doing, or if you have professional management, they also hopefully are not just rubber stamp for what, the big box shops want everyone to be doing, which is to stay and hold. And if you called your advisor last year and they said, oh, just ride the course, buy the dip, you can't time the market, then unfortunately, I think everyone didn't really appreciate that advice last year. And why would they? And so let's look now at gold. This is a really great graphic because you can see just the impact of how much gold was bought last year by the central banks. And it's massive. I mean, this is the largest gold purchase we've had institutionally since 1967. In 1967, we were still on the gold standard. We haven't been on the gold standard since 1971, August 15. So this is clearly by leaps and bounds, this much of a trajectory up lets us know something is afoot. And of course it is. You can see here, spot gold. This is just a gold contract. This is not the true value of gold, but this is a futures contracts. Basically in 1968, we were selling for $35 an ounce, which makes a lot of sense because that's what the set conversion rate was before we went off the gold standard. You can see on January the 6th of this year, we're at 1865. Right now, as I'm recording this, it's come up some, and we are at 1934 rather at today's close. So you can see that gold is absolutely a performer. the consensus is not where I think it should be, but we're seeing gold 3,000, and we don't know when that time frame is. What we do know is what we're going to share with you today, and so we know that that is going to become more and more of a reality as we get through these things that we're going to be going over today. I want to talk to you about something called CLOs, which are collateralized loan obligations. And you guys might have some understanding of CLOs. When you look back to the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, those basically were CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. And what they did then was they took a bunch of retail mortgages and bought them all up, securitized them by packaging them together in the form of a triple A rated by Moody's and S&P Standards & Poor, AAA grade bond, sold for liquidity, and that cycle just kept going for, I would say, a good 6-year block, maybe 4.5 if you look at all the non-conventional products that were being offered. So that is really what went wrong with the global financial crisis, or what we call the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, was that those mortgages started to fail and collapse. And the insurance products, which were credit default swaps, which insured them, were obviously bringing down massive groups like Lehman Brothers and AIG, which AIG was bought out. Merrill Lynch was on the verge of bankruptcy. Bank of America bought them for, pennies on the dollar. And so what we have now are something called CLOs, collateralized loan obligations. And there's something that is happening with CLOs. First of all, they are already, for companies that might not be credit grade, able to issue bonds. And what you can see here from 2022 is a massive increase of CLOs, collateralized loan obligations. And these are at the highest highs ever. So first of all, we've got massive CLOs being written by companies that, again, might not be credit grade worthy to actually paper with bonds. But what's happening in this world is that there's a switch from LIBOR, which is the London Interbank Offer Rate, to SOFR, which is Standardized Offered Funding Rate. I can't remember the exact acronym for it, but the issue is that trillions of dollars of debt obligations were based off of LIBOR. Even in America, lots and lots of things were based off of LIBOR. And as they switch from LIBOR to SOFR, which, by the way, has to happen by June, at the end of this June 30 of this year, 2023. So as of January of 2022, no further debt obligations could reference LIBOR. That had already happened. No further new stuff could reference LIBOR. But they gave until June of 2023. When I say they, I mean the governing body. They said, okay, we won't write any new debt instruments off of LIBOR, based on LIBOR, but we will give until June of 2023 for all existing LIBOR instruments to convert to SOFR. And you'd think that that would be no problem and no big deal, except for they're not exactly the same. You can see here the difference between the 3-month LIBOR and the 3-month SOFR, and the 1-month LIBOR and the 1-month SOFR, and they are substantial. 23 basis points on trillions of dollars is millions of dollars of lost interest. 3 basis points is not as much. So usually the 1 month would not be as big of a discrepancy, but the 3 month is big. And when you're talking about the size of loans, what ends up happening is the person that's earning the interest, the investor, is going to get less interest. So the debtors are happy, but the investors are not happy at all. And you can see now that we have more loans being leveraged for U.S. companies than ever before. It has reached a new record. It reached a new record in 2022. By September, we had already surpassed all of 2021, and the year was not even over. So we have a lot of companies that are basically signaling problems with these CLOs. And as they are forced and squeezed to do this conversion, a lot of investors are rejecting the conversion and saying no. And that is a new anomaly. And we don't exactly know what's going to happen there. So I just want you to understand that there is going to be a play on liquidity as this June date gets closer. Now, one thing I want to talk about is we talked about the strength of the U.S. dollar, and we showed that that was the top third in performing asset in this past year. And this is really sad. I told you all multiple times last year that as the dollar strengthens, countries hate the dollar because they have their domestic currencies in their domestic currency. So their assets they're holding in their domestic currencies, but their liabilities a lot of times are still denominated in US dollars. So as your asset, your currency, your domestic currency is going down in value against a rising dollar, your assets are diminishing, but your liabilities are staying they're just the same. You're not getting any reprieve on that. So this is the Swiss National Bank. In their 116-year history, they had the largest loss in 116 years. They lost $143 billion last year. It was 100. That's the U.S. dollars. It was 131 billion in francs that they lost simply because the strength of the dollar. This loss is 100% in foreign currency holdings, and that was the impact. This is not sustainable. So you're going to see more and more countries. It's already happening. Ecuador, among others. You're going to see more and more Egypt. You're going to see more and more countries that are having a really hard time with the strength of the dollar. It is going to put so much pressure on the outside central banks that we will start to move towards potentially an event, a cataclysmic event, which brings me to this. We have been talking on Crashes and Taxes multiple times about the move of Saudi Arabia to the BRICS nations, and then eventually that if Saudi Arabia moves to transacting outside of the US dollar, that the petrodollar is over. The petrodollar is already ended because Russia broke the petrodollar last year when they no longer agreed to sell gas or crude in US dollars, and they would only sell it in gold or Russian rubles. But now we have a breaking announcement on January 17th that Saudi Arabia is open to trading in outside currencies from the US. This is not going to happen overnight because it is a huge big deal. But you can see here's the Bloomberg article from January 17th. Saudi Arabia says open to settling trade in other currencies. Now, interestingly enough, when Saudi Arabia's finance minister mentioned this, they mentioned three currencies specifically. They mentioned the US dollar, the euro, and then the Saudi Arabian rial. So those were the three currencies that were mentioned. The Chinese yuan was not mentioned. And so what this just shows me is that they're just moving very gradually to getting to let the world know this is their intention. This is very serious. The last two countries that announced intentions of basically transacting outside of the US dollar for crude was obviously Iraq and then Libya. And both of those countries were subsequently involved in US military entanglements eminently after those announcements. So this is huge. Saudi Arabia, I think, learned lessons from other countries that were trying to disembowel the US dollar, like Libya, Gaddafi, and they're being a lot more gradual. They're gradually joining the BRICS economic exercises, like I mentioned to you last year, the 2 weeks that they spent with Saudi Arabia, with South Africa, and a joint economic exercise. They're doing things very slowly. They are made a Russian strategic military alliance for protection, and then they basically made China their number one economic partner. So they're doing things in just small little bites where no one's really like coming out on the news and piecing stuff together. It's a lot of times hard for me to even get a mainstream news source to give you guys the information that I have, because it's a lot of it's not mainstream news yet. I seem to be about 6 to 8 months ahead of everything actually being pushed out to the public, which is great, right? We can get you the information as fast as we have it. But at the same time, it is very strategic and very slow and very methodical, their approach to gradually letting the world know what their plans are. And of course, this would be catastrophic for the US dollar because the petrodollar is what literally gives the dollar its strength. It no longer will need to be bought. And so you're talking about it becoming a currency like anything else. And obviously there's a push towards that with the move to central bank digital currency this year. This is a really interesting graphic, and it just really gives us the purchasing power of the US dollar really since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913 all the way to present day, where you can really see the impact of events that happened in specifically when we went in 2008 and 2009 to a new monetary theory, which is modern monetary theory, and we started quantitative easing. So that is in there. You can see that in there, 2008, 2009. Of course, 2010 to 20 was massive stimulus to overcorrect for shutting down the world and certainly shutting down the U.S. Economy for coronavirus. And then, of course, we are yet to see the impact of all of the dollar changes that have happened macroeconomically as of last year. This is a Bloomberg article that basically talks about the predictions. And I interestingly enough, last year, November 2021, we came out and started telling our client base, this is what's going to happen in 2022. We see it as a mean reversion year. The market is going to come back down. The indices are overbought, as they still are. And honestly, every analyst out there, with the exception of maybe, I think, 2 or 3, saw 2022 as a positive growth year. We were an outlier. Now, interestingly enough, finally, all of the analysts have finally understood what's going on. And you can see right here, the calendar year has many pitfalls. Analyst projections are increasingly negative for equities. And that sounds about right. So I'm just giving you guys the understanding that as of now, we expect this to be a long slog, bad year. I expect events that will globally occur that will break, and we will see the market come down. It is still quite overbought. It is still not at its organic support level that it could stay at in the midst of bad quarterly misses or what have you. So I am fully expecting that we will see the market retrench, and it will be a big retrenchment if it is event driven, which is what we expect. We expect that we will have an event certainly leading up to June where we will see the dollar greatly impacted. And once the dollar gets impacted, that's where you'll really see the metals prices, gold and silver, untether to equities. They've been kind of trading in tandem. Today was a trading day where metals went up almost 2% and the equities did come down a little under 1%. So a lot of times we've seen in 2022 them move together. Today and days were like this where metals are up and equities are down is a really good indicator of what we expect to happen this year. So just understand that most analysts for 2023 are seeing a really negative year. So the next thing I want to talk about is these war games with the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is meeting this week, this January 16 through, basically they end on Friday. And that this is their annual meeting. And the thing that they just did was they just modeled in the last, I think, 3 months, a global cybersecurity attack. And the interesting thing is, if you go back to their modeling of coronavirus, they modeled coronavirus in October of 2019 in tandem with Johns Hopkins, Pfizer. It was a huge group of private corporations and government groups and World Economic Forum, which is really an NGO, a non-government entity organization, but they really focus on the public-private partnership. I submit to you that public-private partnership is the rebranded name for fascism. If you go back and you look at Mussolini, fascism really is a governmental model where the government knows that it can't do certain things, so they tap into corporations that have the ability to do certain things because they're not a government. They work together. It's called a public-private partnership, and the government uses corporations to do things that the government could not do. And this is very simply done, and you can see it now. So I think the intention was that, shutting down the economy in 2020 was supposed to, in theory, and it did work substantially well. In fact, I understand that a lot of these groups that really are pushing towards this global kind of governmental infrastructure that supersedes sovereign countries. It's not countries anymore. I mean, this is nothing that the World Economic Forum does not publicly state directly. We are moving to a world where countries and sovereigns aren't the structured organization anymore, but corporations that are multinational across countries working with global governing groups like the World Health Organization, for example. That's the amendments for the health, IHR, the international health regulations. They want to change that so that it's not countries and sovereigns that are running the world, but it is these global governing groups like the World Health Organization and the United Nations and these kinds of things. So they just modeled this cyber attack very recently. And then interestingly enough, on January 11th, I don't think people realize, this is a Yahoo News quoting Fox News, this January 11th event where the FAA grounded all of our planes in the United States, that had not happened, where we had a complete 100% grounding since 9/11 in 2001. So we're literally talking in this September, it would be 22 years ago. So this was massive. So it's really weird how there's this pattern developing of the World Economic Forum war gaming, some kind of simulation, and then the actual thing happening right away. So we had the simulation for catastrophic cyber attack where Klaus Schwab, who's basically the head of the World Economic Forum, said that this kind of attack, this kind of cyber attack would make coronavirus look like a common cold. So you can imagine the massive impact of coronavirus globally on everything and everybody, on every part of your life. That would be nothing in comparison to a global cyber attack. And of course, he's not wrong in that. We are 100% dependent on our electronics and the cloud. You know, I was just thinking, I have a Tesla, and I got out and I wanted to close my door, and I needed to close it pretty quickly because I needed to just get away from my car and kind of get out of the area I was in. And I had like a low power status. So I went to go to my Tesla app and I had to hit the low power stat. And then I got a breaking news and that then came out. I'm like, this app is really a problem. If you are not in a great area and you needed to lock your car like immediately or unlock your car immediately, my phone alerts are getting in the way of me using my car. But the point I'm trying to make is that they model things and then they actually happen right away. And this is the same pattern that we're having. Now they are meeting this week in Davos, Switzerland. And the biggest new revelation they say is the World Economic Forum is saying that we will have a global massive cyber attack, worldwide within the next 2 years. So it's just interesting how we keep getting these war games that keep actually then coming to reality immediately thereafter. It's quite interesting. This is pretty much, I would say, one of those conspiracy type of people, although I don't know him personally and I don't follow his trends, but I had someone just sent this to me as kind of a meme. And you can see this verified Twitter influencer, DC Drano, saying the World Economic Forum, the next thing to worry about is a catastrophic cyber shutdown. Like I've been saying to you, the government then says, we are preparing for a catastrophic cyber shutdown. People like you and me are saying, oh, it sounds like we might have a catastrophic cyber shutdown. And then you have the media saying, wacko conspiracy theorists worried about catastrophic cyber shutdown. The World Economic Forum, because of their policies and their programs, because of how involved they were in the Canadian situation with the farmers, there's just been so involved that they are quite now brought to the forefront. And I think that the media and the world is not used to their activities, their Agenda 2030 paper being on full blast for everyone to understand, know, read. Most people have no idea what the World Economic Forum even is. So this was a really cute thing. But I wanted to point out here, Elon Musk replying to that influencer saying Starlink. And that's really interesting. Starlink obviously has massive government contracts, specifically with Space Force, which is the new military branch that was started under the Trump administration. That now, as of 2022, there was a cutoff date, a transfer date in 2022, in the last half of 2022, where all satellite communications are now run through Space Force. And Elon Musk, who has these contracts with Space Force and the federal government, basically refers and says Starlink. So it's very interesting, because Elon Musk is quite involved, as we see here. This is a graphic from the Epoch Times, which I would say is a pretty neutral news source. For me, pretty much all mainstream news sources are either right or left. They're either conservative or they're liberal, and they're bent that way in their reporting and all their fact finding. And it's not that anyone's lying. I don't think that people are lying, but I think they just don't give the full context. They'll tell you some small nugget of truth, and then you think that's the whole story, and you're missing the 90% that they really should be telling you so that you can have a frame of reference. The Twitter files with Epoch Times are really cool. You can see there's about 7 different independent journalists. They have all their pictures right here inside of the blue bird. These are the independent journalists that basically Elon Musk gave all of the apparently Twitter records to, that then they went through and investigated and went through and put together summaries of how and what Twitter was doing with the government. And it's quite invasive. And we're talking about not only elections and censoring people on comments on elections or election fraud, election integrity, but also coronavirus and, censoring doctors, that saying that, about natural immunity, or if you wanted to use some other therapeutics. And there's all legal reasons why these things were censored. You cannot mandate an emergency use authorization. I mean, I cannot just tell you the level of frustration as an attorney watching people talk about mandates when the authorization for the drug before the approval that was received for the FDA, an emergency use authorization, first of all, legally requires there's no other viable alternative treatment, which is why the CDC and the FDA and the NIH had to all really sort of, I hate to say this, but demonize hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, even though multiple studies have now come out and proven ivermectin's effectiveness for early intervention. I'm not talking about when someone's super sick, but for early intervention. That was really censored on Twitter because the government at the time was trying to get the FDA to give an EUA authorization, an emergency use authorization, and the law does not allow the government, the FDA, to to skip over all of the normal testing protocols and safety protocols to approve something unless it's an emergency. That's the definition, emergency use authorization, and there's no other alternatives. So had ivermectin been proven or hydroxychloroquine been proven on in those early days as an early intervention, then there wouldn't have been an EUA authorization for the Pfizer and the Moderna and the AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson vaccines for coronavirus. It just would never have gotten approved. So the government, the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, behind the scenes were working directly with Twitter to basically censor those doctors and that opinion. That was related to the EUA. This has nothing to do with anything other than letting you know how much control of information was already happening at Twitter. Of course, there's all the election information, which I tend to stay away from because it's just not my wheelhouse. And there's just so many things. So it's just interesting how we are starting to get a mapping of sort of how much involvement the government has had with social media. And I can tell you from information I have that this same information will start to be coming from Google and Facebook. So you're going to see the amount of censorship in 2023 that is involved with Alphabet, Google, and also Facebook, Meta. And that's going to be really interesting. So we're going to have a lot more information coming out this year. And I just want to leave you with kind of the last little bit, because I know it's very frustrating. I think most of us think after we've been going through such a rough road for so long in the environment and economically speaking, where do we put money? Where do we have growth this year? We'd love to get yield and growth this year, as we all, of course, want to at our practice. But this is a really famous quote from Charlie Munger, which is, of course, Warren Buffett's right-hand person, been with him since, I think, forever. And he says, the big money is not in the buying and the selling, but in the waiting. And this is so apropos for 2023, because as much as we expect massive economic upheavals in 2023 that really could have happened in 2022, were just delayed for whatever various reasons, they are coming. And it's not the time to get complacent. We will look back on this economic time period and we will see that all of the warning signs were there, that the writing was on the wall, that we could have said easily the second that coronavirus occurred and we started really pumping the money in 2020, that we were going to have an economic shift globally. And I don't want you to in any way overlook the fact that the time frame of any potential dollar collapse with the announcement of Saudi Arabia moving to outside currencies beyond the dollar, that potential dollar collapse could be appropriately timed right around the same time that a lot of countries are going to be ready to move their citizens onto their central bank digital currencies. So the digital dollar, we know, is in beta testing now and will be operational by May of this year. So we could be moving to CBDCs everywhere as fast as this year. And it's just really interesting that that time frame is lining up exactly when Saudi Arabia might be making an announcement that could potentially collapse the US dollar. So if you were going to implement something called a great reset, which is of course the terminology from the World Economic Forum, and its slogan is build back better. That is, build back better since the global pandemic of coronavirus. With a great reset, the time frame is all miraculously lining up such that if we were to have a dollar collapse event, the world and American citizens and all US dollars could easily be transferred after such a collapse event to all digital currency, and cash could be gone forever. So this is all speculative of me, of course, and just my opinion reading these tea leaves of everything that's going on. But I just have to point out that if I were trying to make that happen, that time frame lineup, I couldn't make it happen any better than it actually is happening. So just be aware, be critically listening for all of the news and processing and saying, how is this contributing to the global change that we know is on its way? Because all of these things are little nuggets and little pebbles that are going to add up to the walkway to where we're headed for 2023. So I hope that really helps. I definitely would love to spend more time with crashes and taxes this year, you guys, but it does have to grow. So spread the word organically. If you want my time and you want my research, love to be with you. But this is not monetized. This is purely for fun to get this information out there because I love America. I love our Constitution. I love finance. And even though it's going to be a hell of a road this year, I love to walk it with you. Take care, everybody. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week, hopefully, God willing. Take care.